Good evening, everyone. I would like to introduce Manjula Subramanian first. She's an engineering graduate by education and started working in the IT industry, gained core experience in application software development for 2 decades in India and in the US. Her initial brush with privacy requirements was in a company that is engaged in US healthcare industry. From 2010, she has been engaged in management systems standards practice, focusing on information security, BC and SM in India and Middle East geographies. She is an eager privacy law student and has qualified in a few courses mapped to GDPR. She is a certified information systems auditor and certified project management professional with a diploma in cyber law and certified risk manager by ISO 31000, certified ERM professional of OCEG. Besides this, she's a lead auditor in ISO 27001, 27701, 22301, 20000, 9001, 14001, and 45001. She represents India in ISO technical committees relating to business continuity and risk management standards. Looking forward to this session, Manjula. I'm ready with my notepad and pen. Over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Shalini. And thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak at Jnanavardhini. I hope I do ample justice, but I have to warn that I am a learner myself. I am learning a lot ever since I joined the FTPPI group and having attended the classes conducted by Mr. Navi and Ramesh. My interest has now increased in learning more, especially since our own country is coming out with a privacy law. It's become a topic which is very dear to me. So thank you indeed for this opportunity. And as I said, I'm learning myself. So if there are people in the audience who know more than me and would like to add, I would definitely welcome them during the course of this presentation. I don't have many slides, but I would like to highlight the challenges that exist in anonymization and pseudonymization and considerations, of course. So I'm going to start right now. The topic I picked was anonymization and pseudonymization, mainly because this is a topic that I don't think many people are talking about, but it is extremely important in the current era that we're living in, I would say. So when we look at pseudonymization, anonymization, I use both these terms, but they actually come under the larger realm of data de-identification. So, and of course, our driver for pseudonymization and anonymization is data privacy. But the objective should be that pseudonymized or anonymized data is actually usable. And this is what I've been reading about for the past few days to see how best I can explain what these techniques actually do. But before we go into the data de-identification realm, I just wanted to speak about where in the GDPR does it talk about anonymization. So recital 26 is talking about anonymous information, and it's all, but it's again, it's a recital, so it's guidance. It's not part of the articles. So it's namely information which does not relate to an identified or identifiable natural person or to personal data rendered anonymous in such a manner that the data subject is no longer identifiable. So there is a mention of anonymous information in GDPR. In PDPB, anonymization has been clearly stated, and it is stated as in relation to personal data means such irreversible process of transforming or converting personal data to a form in which a data principle cannot be identified and which meets the standards of irreversibility specified by the authority. And anonymized data is again referenced within the PDPB, means data which has undergone the process of anonymization. Then I moved on to pseudonymization. Pseudonymization is mentioned in, again, article in recital 26 of GDPR, but in PDPB, there is no mention of pseudonymization. So this is just a background. And as I said, anonymization and pseudonymization are both under the larger umbrella of data de-identification. So when it comes to considerations, why do we need anonymization? Why do we need pseudonymization? Why is it so important for organizations to consider this, especially when they're dealing with data? And to start off with, all of us know that we're now in this age called the data age, and some people refer to it as the data revolution age, where we are surrounded by data in so many forms. And obviously, organizations would like to use this data to remain competitive. They're actually looking to see how best this data will help them improve their products, reach a bigger markets, determine patterns to determine how they influence users. Yes, obviously, we all know that data is being used to influence users on the way they buy things, on the way they perceive things. So when it comes to data, for organizations which collect data, they're sitting on a gold mine. That's what it's considered. And when they want to share this data, obviously they can't do it as it is. So most privacy laws, right? And of course, coming back to privacy, if an organization has data and it needs to share it, then yes, the considerations of privacy have started to creep in. And since the advent of GDPR and before that EU directive, almost every country has introduced privacy law. So and there were some other points that I wanted to make about data itself. I work with people who work with IoT and who work with artificial intelligence and who are working with machine learning. So for these people, data is something that they really crave. They need data to teach machines, to tell a machine how to do something or how to identify something. And therefore, it becomes really important when we look at data. Today, if you buy a toaster, we have smart toasters, and this data is being fed back to some device, to something using IoT. The data is being fed back to the cloud. So, as per analysts, 2021, this year, big data is supposed to be a $66.8 billion industry. So this gives the magnitude of importance for data, but then what happens to privacy, right? So, and throughout the year, I mean, almost every day we are seeing incidents of data breaches, penalties, so many issues that have come up, right? So now stepping into why is anonymization so attractive to organizations? Anonymization is obviously attractive to organizations because realistically it's outside the purview of any privacy law. Because the minute you say that your data is anonymous, it means you can't, go backwards and identify a person using that data. So this gives organizations the capability to one, use the data beyond the means or the purposes for which it was collected, and of course share it with other organizations, share it with organizations which are building models for artificial intelligence, etc. But when should an organization consider anonymization? I used to think it was typically after processing of data is complete, but that is no longer true because while the data is still live data and which is still being used by the organization, organizations want to share this data. They want to share this so that it can be used and models prepared. So coming to pseudonymization, in my opinion, anonymization is not a risk control. This is my opinion. I'm not saying that it is right. The reason I say it's not a risk control is the minute you anonymize data, then you no longer are bothered about privacy. You just can use that data for whatever purpose you intend to. Whereas pseudonymization is a little more complicated because data is still live, you're still processing the data, and you're making it harder to get to. So, in my opinion, pseudonymization is a risk control while an organization is actively processing data or having to retain data. So, for example, if you take healthcare industries, especially the US healthcare, HIPAA dictates that they have to maintain healthcare records for up to 7 years. So data is at rest, but it's still personally identifiable information. So pseudonymization, in my opinion, is a better risk control for data that is currently being processed. Okay, and now we'll move into the techniques for data anonymization. These are some of the common techniques that I have read about that are being used. Since this is a very short session, I'm only going to tell you what each one is about, and this gives you an opportunity to go and read, and many of them are obviously mathematical. So a 45-minute session, we can't do justice to any of these techniques. So the first one, data masking, I think all of us are very familiar with data masking because pretty much everyone uses a credit card. And data masking is just a technique where certain characters of a string are masked. And we see that when we get our credit card statements. For people who have lived in the US, you know that the social security number is typically masked. Only the last 4 digits of the social security number are actually shared. Or even during a call with your credit card company, they typically ask you for the last 4 characters or the last 4 digits of your credit card. So that's data masking, where a particular value is substituted with some, where a particular value is substituted with something else. So we typically see the beautiful X's in our masked credit card numbers. Pseudonymization is a little more complicated because here there's the logic behind pseudonymization is a value is replaced with an alternate value. So instead of Manjula Subramanian, they can call me Alice. Or, instead of Govind Srinivasan, you call him, some other name. So pseudonymization is where you're substituting one value with another to make sure that you can't go backwards and identify the individual. Generalization is again something that we all probably practice. I do it, at least. I have to be very frank. When I go to places and they ask me to give my address, I won't give my full address. I will exclude my door number. I will exclude my street number. I may give the area where I live in, and of course, my PIN code, but I don't give enough information to make it easy to get back to me. This is my personal thing, but that's what generalization is. So if you have a database of addresses and you want to do some analysis on a particular area, you can exclude the door numbers, the street numbers. This is generalization. Now, data swapping is mathematical, little more mathematical. Even pseudonymization is mathematical. The models that are used to implement pseudonymization, yes, they are mathematical. But data swapping uses permutation and shuffling. So within a data set, it shuffles information. So instead of date of birth, under the date of birth column, it may put something else. The record remains intact, the data set remains intact, can be used, but you should know where the data has gone, from where to where the data has gone. That's what data swapping is. Now, data perturbation, this is purely mathematical, where noise is introduced into a data set. I didn't find easily explainable techniques on how data perturbation is actually done, but there are many papers and mathematical demonstrations of how data perturbation is done. It modifies the data set by applying rounding number methods. So for every value in the data set, there is a mathematical modification. And what research says is lower the base. Okay, sorry, I'm explaining this wrong. Lower the base. So if I use base 2 for data perturbation, my data utility is high, but my data anonymization is low. And as the base increases, the data anonymity becomes higher. Okay, so this is on data perturbation. As I said, it's a mathematical model, and I couldn't find anything which was easily explainable to everyone, but I will look it up again. Synthetic data is something that I didn't quite understand. Frankly, I have to say this, but synthetic data is a data anonymization or data de-identification technique whereby data is actually randomly generated. So my guess is such data sets actually contain real data and also synthetic data. We don't know which ones are the real ones. Now, this is purely my own interpretation because I couldn't get enough information about synthetic data, but these appear to be the most common methods of data anonymization. So now I'd like to go into the challenges. And this statement is has been written by Paul Ohm. He's a lawyer, and he published this paper, I think, in 2009. Yes, in 2009. So data anonymization has been around for a long time. His statement is you can either have useful data or perfectly anonymous data, but they can't be both. You can't have fully anonymized data which has good data utility. This is his conclusion. There is a paper, it's called Broken Promises of Privacy and Responding to the Surprising Failure of Anonymization. If you look this up, this is a really well-written paper, but it's a pretty long paper. It's about 77 pages long. And he has used a lot of case studies to explain why purely anonymous data has absolutely no data utility. So from the perspective of data controllers, data fiduciaries, the more they anonymize, the less usable the data is. So this is the biggest challenge for data controllers and data processors also, where they are using anonymization. Now, this is something which I read recently, and then I found out that it's pretty old. It's really old, actually. There is a study that says 87% of the US population can be uniquely identified by only three parameters. Three parameters: the zip code that they're living in, their gender, and the postal code, their date of birth. So, three parameters. Um, so, I went backwards to try and find out who actually came up with this. Now, this particular picture um, is an old picture and it's a very old case study, but the lady in this picture is highly instrumental for making lawmakers sit up and notice that anonymized data is not truly anonymous. Her name is Latanya. Dr. Latanya Sweeney. She is a professor in Harvard, but this picture is an old one. And she proved in 1997, that data that was released on the premise of being anonymous was not anonymous at all. And she did this purely, I won't say purely, she did this predominantly using manual methods. She didn't even use a lot of computerized methods. The person in the picture was the governor of Massachusetts at the time. His name is William Weld. And in 1996, yes, I believe in 1996, he authorized the release of healthcare information from the state insurance, the GIC, the General Insurance Company, I think that was what it was called. He authorized the release of healthcare information of state workers in Massachusetts for the pure purpose of analytics. And he reassured the public saying that this data is anonymous, therefore it cannot be traced back to any individual. Now, this Professor Sweeney, she was a student at the time, and she wanted to disprove this statement. After this was done, okay, the data was released in 1995. In 1996, this governor actually attended a meeting and he collapsed during the meeting. He was hospitalized. So Professor Sweeney proved that with the data that had been released, the so-called anonymous data that was released, she could trace back using just the medical database. And I think she used, she has mentioned a few other unrelated databases, unrelated. She purchased them for $20 and she linked this governor's health records to the anonymous data, and she actually delivered it to his office. She proved to him that this anonymous data set that you have released can be de-anonymized with unrelated data sets. And this made lawmakers sit up, and which is why the HIPAA Act had more emphasis on privacy of individuals after this was proved. However, she faced a lot of brickbats. She was not allowed to publish this because it obviously makes people jittery when they know that their privacy can be compromised. So the challenge here is anonymous data can be de-anonymized if you have a related a data set which can be linked back to the anonymous data set. And of course, there is mathematics involved behind it, but the point is it was proved that it can be de-anonymized. So this was case one. This was a big challenge. And the other one that I read about, which was very interesting, again, this is a very mathematical paper. You can read through it. I read through most of it, but it wasn't very understandable to me, the mathematics side of it. In 2006, Netflix actually released 500,000 anonymous ratings for a Netflix prize competition. Now, there were two researchers. This gentleman, Professor Arvind Narayanan, is now, I think, with Princeton, and this gentleman, Vitaly Shmatikov, was his guide, was his PhD guide, and they proved that with this anonymous database and little to no knowledge of the subscriber, they were able to mix and match and de-anonymize records. Again, this is a long and lengthy paper, but the point is, again, anonymity was disproved. But what was more worrisome in this particular de-anonymization exercise was the researchers were able to prove that with something as innocuous as movie preferences, they were able to trace the political preferences, religious preferences of individuals that they were able to identify from this database. So the point I'm trying to make here is there are many public instances of anonymized data which has become, which has been proved that it is not really anonymous. And the bigger battle is this. This graph has been, I couldn't find the source for this, but it has been published in many websites. This is the privacy versus data utility trade-off. So if you see this, the more the utility that you want for your data, meaning you want to be able to analyze it, you want to slice and dice it, you want to do modeling with it, lesser the privacy, almost zero. The maximum utility of data is at the cost of privacy totally. And the more you want to increase privacy by de-identification techniques, lesser is the utility of data. Okay. So these were some of the challenges that I found that are interesting. Of course, we need to have more technical background to be able to understand how how de-anonymization works, but from the perspective of trying to be auditors or implementing a framework, we need to appreciate that anonymity is not really guaranteed, even with the techniques that have been stated as the best techniques for anonymization or de-identification. So to come to the end of my presentation, I would like to share this. I read about this particular model, differential privacy. Now, differential privacy apparently is another mathematical model, yes, but it's not to anonymize. No, it's the reason this differential privacy model has been brought into the picture is researchers feel that anonymity and pseudonymity is not working. So with anonymized data, how safe is their identity? So this differential privacy model allows an organization to determine how strong their anonymized or pseudonymized data is. And it determines the privacy. So given an anonymous data set using differential privacy, an analyst could determine how private or how difficult it is to de-anonymize that particular data set. And as of now, I did a lot of reading. This particular model, the differential privacy model, appears to be considered the most resilient model when it comes to data privacy because it is focusing on the privacy of the record and not on the anonymization, pseudonymization. Yes, indirectly it is focusing on the um, anonymization and pseudonymization. We're trying to determine how easy it is to de-anonymize the data. Okay, and the configurable parameter, there's a configurable parameter in this particular model. It's called epsilon. And what is stated is lower the epsilon, higher the privacy, and higher the epsilon, lower the privacy. This particular differential privacy model is currently being used by Google. It's also being used by Apple. Apple apparently uses differential privacy to share data that it collects from its devices and sends back to its back to the cloud for analytical purposes. However, there is a very well-known data researcher. Her name is McSherry. Her last name is McSherry, and she has pointed out that Apple uses an epsilon value of 14, which is as good as not having any privacy as at all. That is what her conclusion is. This is also in published in a publication. You can find it. So the conclusion I came to is anonymization, pseudonymization may be practical solutions for organizations to use data, share data, but the methods are not very strong. And in conclusion, I would say that privacy versus data utility battle is here to stay. As long as we need data, we are data hungry, we will definitely have this challenge where privacy breaches occur, where data released as anonymous can be de-anonymized. But the challenge is with the progression of time, we have a lot of negative players, people who are doing this for the wrong reasons. Of course, in the case of this Professor Sweeney and Professor Aravind Narayanan, they wanted to prove a point that truly anonymized data is not, can be or rather anonymized, purely anonymized, the claim of purely anonymized data could be broken. Okay. So as long as we sit on data, we're going to have this struggle between privacy and data utility. And for me, I believe I need to do much more research to understand which models would be of more use to us and to the organizations that we work with. Of course, there may be many people here who know much more than me, but thank you all for the opportunity. And to conclude, I just wanted to share this slide. This is from a product, an anonymization product company. They've done this really nice timeline, and I think it's interesting to see that as early as 1980. So, I mean, we're almost 40 years down the road. As early as 1980, this researcher, Dorothy Denning, said that data cannot be anonymized with certainty. And in fact, she stopped doing her research. It is in 2006 that the differential privacy that I was talking about was released by this researcher Cynthia Dwork from Microsoft Research. But it is only now in 2014, I believe, that Google has openly stated that they are using differential privacy for the data that they collect. So this timeline I found quite interesting. 1997, that's when Professor Sweeney proved that the anonymized data could be, de-anonymized. So I believe that as we progress, as more and more data is collected and more privacy laws come into play, we will still have a big challenge as to determining how how best to protect data. Will these While these methods are provided, researchers say that it's an easy out. There is one researcher who has said data anonymization is an easy out for organizations to say that they can use data beyond the purposes of collection, but are risking the privacy of the data that they are sitting on. So thank you all very much. Um, I hope it was informative, and I look forward to interacting with you as part of this session.
Yes, indeed, Manjula, it was very informative session. And I just wanted to check with Mr. Anant. He wanted to add on to the synthetic data point.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Uh,
Whoever.
th-
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Very good presentation. This is not related to privacy as such, but means we use synthetic data in network uh, management scenario. Say, for example, if a company at the edge has two IS connections to two ISPs, say Airtel and Vodafone, or
Yes, sir.
Geo. So what we do is we have to test whether which is up. So whether Airtel is up, or if Airtel is our primary ISP and Geo is our secondary ISP. So we have to send packets. So there means in Cisco we have a tool called as IPSLA, which generates whatever data we want, like whatever protocol related data. It's not actual data, it's synthetic data. So it's self-generated thing, and we can ask it to generate that particular amount of traffic, and use that particular protocol to send to Airtel. Say if I want to ping it, just say whether Airtel's ISP router is alive, I will send that data, and to Geo also I will send data. So if Airtel doesn't reply back within certain seconds, I will switch to Geo. The same thing I can test web servers. So if I'm connecting to two web servers or two email servers, or I'm just taking two, it can be many. So that's where we use synthetic data. It's not a privacy related concept, but that's where the application of synthetic data comes. There is no personalized data or something. And one more thing, the data perturbation,
Yes,
where
sir.
the noise part, it's used by it's used very much in security field. Like what attackers do is, say suppose they want to send and it's used in JavaScript basically. So when they want to send a malicious JavaScript, what happens is when the script comes and comes from the web page or anything which we download, so what happens is it actually hits the edge where we have a detection engine, where it has a signature or behavior based thing, and it will try to scan whether in that JavaScript there is particular pattern which can match. So this is well known thing. So what malicious or threat actors do is they obfuscate, like they add some noise to their JavaScript, which is very difficult to it's not encryption. Deobfuscation is a very difficult skill. So they add a lot of noise, and when it comes and hits the browser engine, it infects, or in the command and control server, which is used now in the present day attack, because JavaScript is still used, but the main attack they want to do is an APT thing, which is a command and control thing. There also they use noise to their thing, which is not recognized because of the amount of traffic which goes. So they add noise, and only when it comes and hits their program, which is there in the victim's computer, that will deobfuscate. So like it's not completely foolproof. There are programs which can deobfuscate, and there are courses which are conducted in Black Hat which actually teach how to deobfuscate. So it's mathematics involved, and it's also a lot of skills involved. Like usually the simple obfuscation they do is add b means use base 64, and then it's very difficult sometimes for people who don't understand what is happening. So that's where it's used. So that this is not privacy related thing, but these are the applications of data perturbation and synthetic data.
Yes,
Thank you, Anant. And
then the same principle can be applied to data that needs to be protected. So that's why perturbation is considered
Yes, yes.
a good anonymization technique. But again, because it's mathematical, as you rightly said, there's a lot of skill involved, and there are values involved to the degree of anonymity. That's the challenge that we are seeing. Anonymous data is not truly anonymous because there is some data point which can be traced back.
Yes, yes. So it's also the sample size. So when someone says
Yes.
anonymity, it's not. I mean, we should ask the next question: what is the sample size? So if you have only sample size as 5, we can manually, as one means the ma'am you pointed out, like we can easily do it. And there is a science, and there are companies which actually do it if
Yes.
the sample size is less. Thank you, ma'am.
But thank you very much for this.
Right.
As I said, this was a topic that was learning for me.
Manjula, thank you. Srinivasan here. Thanks for the nice session. It was very
Thank you,
interesting,
sir.
a lot of topics. So only one thing I just want to highlight is when I was reading even Navi sir's book on the PDPA bill. So he has mentioned anonymization is the personal data parameters has to be forensically destroyed. So it's a very high-end concept. So when you destroy using forensic techniques, then you cannot re-identify it, right?
You can't re-identify it, and that's the point. The minute you do that, right, data also loses its value.
Utility,
That
you're
is the
saying.
challenge. The utility goes away. You're right. Navi sir mentioned this, but within the act itself, it doesn't say this. If I'm not wrong, the act only talks about anonymization. The technique that we use, yes,
No,
has to be.
let me add one more thing here.
Yes, sir. Please,
When,
sir.
when you destroy the identity parameters, what becomes available is the anonymized information. But let us not say anonymized information is useless. Anonymized information is not useful for people who want to process the identifiable information. But suppose I want to have some statistical analysis done or some other research to be
Yes.
done. For me, anonymized information is good enough. So big data has got one component of processing of anonymized data where say I want to know what is the effect of, let us say, how COVID has affected the population in general, at what age group and other things. There, the person's identity is not the criteria. So anonymization is the boundary between personally identified data and non-personal data. Now, each has got their own utility. Okay, personally identifiable data can be used only within the organization. You cannot monetize it as much as you would like to, because
Absolutely.
it will affect the privacy. But the non-personal data or the anonymized personal data can be monetized. It all depends on your ingenuity of what kind of usage that can be put into. Okay, so the two are different. They have got different users, and irreversibility of anonymized information is actually the criteria which is required to be found out, which is what the Data Protection Authority has to give as a form of a guideline. Now, if I ask you that we have got encryption, now HIPAA says if an encrypted data is say compromised, it is not PHA compromise, so that you don't have to give data breach notification. You are aware of that, no? Okay, so there are many.
Yes, sir.
There are many data protection laws where, I think GDPR also has got a similar provision that the data leakage of an encrypted data, where of course the key also should not be kept in the same server or something like that, is not considered a data breach at all. Now, can we say encryption cannot be broken? Encryption can be broken. It all depends upon the effort you are going to put in breaking the encryption. Same way, anonymization also can be broken. Let us say, okay, there is a research or something like that. The person puts his lifetime work on taking, say, some 10,000 anonymized data and then tries to identify that. That does not defeat the purpose of anonymization. And Indian law says that that is crime. We have to handle it as a crime. So if somebody wants to de-anonymize an anonymization, it is a question of a crime. Whereas as privacy practitioners, we have to see that it is anonymized in such a manner that with reasonable efforts, it should not be possible to re-identify. Okay, so now that reasonable standard is what the DPA is going to provide. So that is the anonymization which we are talking of. Now, why I say that it has to be forensically destroyed is, even the organization which anonymized the information, they also should not be able to re-identify. That is the crux of anonymization. In pseudonymization or de-identification, the organization which does the de-identification or pseudonymization will have a mapping of the original data with the converted data. And as long as that mapping information is held confidential, the rest of the data, you can say that it is de-identified. Now, if the company wants to re-identify, they have the two data in that mapping information as well as the converted data in their possession. They can combine the two and then identify. So that is the de-identification or pseudonymization, whereas anonymization is once for all the parameters of identity are destroyed. Even if I want to re-identify, I should not be able to do, except that a criminal can do it. Okay, you can use quantum computing and then break anything is possible. And we are talking of adding some other data and then trying to identify. That is research, or I would like to call it as a criminal activity in this context. Okay, in another context, we may say it is research. Okay, in the private this thing, it is under the Indian Act a punishable crime with 3 years of imprisonment. And organizations which want to be in that de-anonymization industry should consider that they are no different than a cyber criminal who tries to break your password to the bank and take away your money. Okay, so as technologists, we have to find what is the reasonable standard which the Data Protection Authority has to find. Anant, you have got any comments on this?
Navi sir, I'm sorry, before Anant answers, there was one point that you raised which is very important and I forgot to mention it. HIPAA has actually given a guideline on the number of data points that have to be anonymized, whereas GDPR and PDPB do not have that guidance as of now.
Now, PDPB, you have to wait for Data Protection Authority to come up with the irreversible standard. They have clearly stated that there will be an irreversible standard and it will be given. Now, it is not a question of how many parameters. In fact, it should not be re-identifiable at all. Okay. Now, it is difficult to give too much of detailed guidelines of how many parameters, because once you give that, then maybe you are also leaving a loophole for that. So probably the lawmakers would normally describe it in general terms only. They may not come to the exact number of parameters, because each data set may have different number of parameters. One data set will have 10 parameters, another data set will have 25 parameters. Now, how can I put a gap of 10 or something? It is not possible. So for one of the data sets, maybe if you take the 8 parameters, maybe it may become impossible to de-anonymize. If you take 8 parameters out of a 25 parameter data set, it may still be identifiable. So the number of parameters is not a good enough idea. In HIPAA, the identifiers itself are limited, 18. Okay. Now, what if there are more identifiers than the 18? This 18 was fixed in 1996. Now, with all these developments, there could be other ways of identifying the data set. So that is not included in HIPAA. So 1996 standard of 18 parameters, on that basis, they may say that out of 18, you take out the name and address or something like that. We will be accepting it. That is the standard they are going to accept. So irreversibility standard used in the HIPAA may be their standard. We may try to adopt our own standard. You should look at this Chris Gopalakrishna committee report, where some discussions have been made, because there what they have said is once you anonymize, you can actually trade with that anonymized data. So in their annexures, they have discussed this differential privacy and K anonymity and maybe some other models also, and given some views of their own. But of course, this is a mathematical research problem. Educational institutions, academic institutions have to get into this. If the Data Protection Authority wants to give a standard, probably they will not be, it is not advisable for them to give a specific standard or some descriptive explanation. They should leave it to generalistic description of anonymity, like what we are saying. It should be reasonably not possible to anonymize or something like that. Going beyond that is like in the encryption, you may say that so many keys is the limit. Okay, if you encrypt it with this kind of algorithm, it is okay, we say. Okay, now the next day there will be a new algorithm which will be coming. So the legal authority cannot say that if you encrypt with, say, a particular 1048 keys thing, it is sufficient or something like that. So because it is a moving target, either the standard authority will have to keep on revising it from time to time. When I say standard authority here, I am talking of the DPA. Okay, they have to keep on repeating, renewing their thought process, like in the case of the CCA, that is the controller of certifying authorities in India. When they talk about acceptable hash algorithm or the RSA algorithm, hash algorithm has undergone a change. Initially, it was MD5 and your SHA-1. Later on, they dropped MD5 and then added SHA-2. Maybe tomorrow they may even change that and put another elliptical curve or some other kind of thing. So that is a process of, you can say, updating the standard. It will also be applied to the irreversibility standard of anonymization by the DPA. Yeah, other technical people, Meena Lal has got something to say.
First of all, thank you, Manjula, for doing this session. Of course, I'm not very well versed with technical terms and technology. I wanted to ask you, once there is HIPAA in the US and the DPA could come out with some guidelines or instructions, what is it that has already been done in the US? And why I'm asking this, what can one foresee coming in India after PDPA comes in?
Tough question, because despite HIPAA being such a big law, you still see, and I'm not an expert, I can't really say that, say this with certainty, but despite HIPAA having so many and being in existence from 1996, we still see that healthcare records are breached, right? So again, HIPAA tells them what to do, but not how to do it. It's a prescriptive law. Organizations and with dealing with healthcare information are having to use different techniques. I guess it goes back to what Navi sir is saying, that the guide for irreversibility should give some high-level guidance to us as to the approach to be taken to manage data. That's what my inference is, because even with HIPAA, as Navi again was saying about the 18 data points, they have stated that If 18 data points are protected, then as he rightly pointed out, even if your data is breached, you're not required to report it because theoretically it cannot be, um, uh, okay, in theory it cannot be easily identified. As he said, the effort required to de-anonymize is significant, and but it does exist.
Anant,
So, sir,
you have any expansion of your thoughts?
Yes, please. Anyone?
No, the point is you made, sir, regarding the utility of privacy data. That I totally agree, because in that, if it is anonymized, it doesn't mean that it has lost value. It has lost value for the marketers who try to reach out to the people. But that is one point. Second is the effort required to break it means, if I relate to security, so what cryptanalysts do, like people who break the algorithm, who means the mathematicians, they actually don't try to find the key. They try to find the weakness in the algorithm. That is one set of people who put in their a lot of effort to do that. There are other set of people who don't do all those things. They will just do social engineering. So the same thing applies to privacy. So if there will be people who try to break anonymity, means the algorithms which anonymize the data. There will be definitely a set of mathematicians who want to prove and just to find a better algorithm, and eventually it may be broken, but there will be like based on what other parameters. So the second thing is also what people like, those are actually people who want to build a better algorithm. There will be another set of people who actually want to break it so that they can use it for their thing. So for them, the utility comes based on what is the time value of the data. So if I want to target people who are watching, say, Euro football tournament, or this something which is very relevant. So if it takes 1 year to de-anonymize their data, the people who want to actually break it won't spend time. What they do is they usually go and directly ask the people, or give some form, because people don't value privacy, means more like they value the security, but privacy is okay for them. So that's where the thing lies. So again, it's based on how strong the algorithm is and how many people the mathematicians are trying to break it. There will be mathematicians who actually try to build it, and there are other set of mathematicians who try to break it. Eventually it will be broken. Like even when we had the discussion, Navi sir, in our class regarding quantum cryptography, it will be, even we don't know right now. Means Google has one model which they say it's a they have a proof of concept, but we don't know. But if it comes, many algorithms might be broken. But the same thing as Navi sir put, it can be used to encrypt the data also. But we don't know, someone might find a weakness in the algorithm which uses quantum cryptography and break it. So it's a very difficult thing, and everything is based on the utility of the data. So if for example, if PMO related data is kept private, and if that can has to be anonymized, people will spend a lot of time. But if it is just general data of people, they won't spend so much time to break it actually. But it
There
means
should be
yeah.
economic benefit in spending money.
Yes, sir. That is the most thing, because all these things are done by means there was one discussion in Telegram why people do this. In the criminal world of internet, there is no ethics. So if you give money, they will do anything. So if they want to break it, they'll break it. As sir pointed out, there should be economic value. So if you say I will give 2 bitcoins, break it, they will spend a lot of time to get the data, and you have to pay them. So there is no reason why people do all those things. So they do. So it's all based on the economic financial value and the time value. So if people want to buy that, if there are people who buy the data, the LinkedIn data which was hacked was available the very next day on a lot of dark web for free. So means and eventually the first person who sold it for a big amount. So it's, if people buy it, they will do it. So all these things, again, we have to look at from a mathematical point of view, which people have to work. And also once it is designed, how people try to do in unethical way to get it done. So there will be those kind of, there can't be a foolproof security solution or a foolproof privacy solution. It's all compromise, which we have to adopt. That's my point.
Yeah, Meena.
One thought.
Yeah, Reena. Yeah.
Yeah,
sir,
sorry, just
yeah, Reena.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
so just one thought. Yeah, one thought is that do we think that this technique of pseudonymization or anonymization will have a dependency on the valuation of data in coming years, or any other technique which will evolve?
See, anonymized data, it goes out of the personal data. So it will be coming for the valuation of the non-personal data. In fact, the data business of organizations will be developed because they have a good, somebody uses a good anonymization algorithm and gives them a set of non-personal data, that is anonymized personal data. Okay, that is what was once a personal data, after anonymization becomes one category of non-personal data. And there are companies who would be liking to do some business out of that non-personal data. Okay, so value is there. So when we are talking of data valuation, if data is in the personal data form, we have to look at it in terms of valuation of the utility of the asset for a personal data related activity only. And if it is anonymized, then you have to value it on the basis of a utility of a non-personal data. Now, this conversion has a cost. Okay, so when you actually put more money into your identified personal data, it becomes something else which may be less valuable or more valuable. I don't know as of today. So in terms of valuation of data, normally we say the cost is one factor which we have to take into calculation of data valuation. But in the boundary of conversion of personal data to non-personal data, additional cost may actually decrease the value. Or in other words, what you can also say is, if you don't anonymize it, if you are holding a personal data beyond a period of 1 year or 2 years, it will cease to be of value as a personal data, because most of the data protection laws say that you have to get a renewal of consent after say 1 year. So if I simply hold a personal data for 5 years, that value may become zero, because that personal data quality would have suffered.
I hope I'm audible. Hello. Thank you, Shalini.
Yes,
Navi
Mr.
sir,
Naik.
you're on mute.
Yeah. So sorry, I got disconnected. What I was saying is, normally for data valuation, keep on adding the cost. Okay, so cost is one of the basis for valuation of data. But at this inflection point of a personal data being converted into the non-personal data, this rule of valuing the data by cost addition fails. It is like the law of physics, when the speed of a particle crosses the light particle, all your Newtonian laws will fail. So like that, at this point where a personal data becomes a non-personal data, the cost may actually be incurred not to just increase the value, but to preserve part of the value. As I said, if you don't anonymize and its purpose for which the personal data has been collected is over, then you are supposed to delete that data under the personal data regime. So after the purpose is over, personal data value should come down to zero. And you have to actually put some more cost to destroy that. Okay, let us say up to the destruction, it is your responsibility. So once the purpose is over, you destroy it and bring it down to zero. Now, by anonymizing, this what would have been a zero value is having some value. In fact, your destruction cost, I will substitute it with the anonymization cost. So at the cost of destruction, I am converting the current personal value, which is going to become a zero value item, have some value. So in data valuation, you have to trace this kind of a principle. And this is what I am trying to say, that in data valuation model, the fact that data is a different class of asset, you cannot value it like you value, let us say, an intangible asset or something like that. This is a totally different kind of an asset. The kind of argument I am now giving, that there is an inflection point after this, the data will either become zero, or on anonymization, it will accumulate value. These are all things which are, you can say it is a theoretical concept, but everything starts with theory. Only when there is a theory, then perhaps some practical solutions will be found. This question was from whom? I think Reena.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think
You explained.
Shalini. Yeah, Shalini is a chartered accountant.
I mean,
so
I
think
wanted
she will
to.
appreciate what I have been telling now.
So I just wanted to say that, you explained it so methodically that it sounded like a beautiful mathematical equation, which will be easy to, implement.
Okay. In fact, I am in the process of working out a pseudonymization model, and one of the software person is trying to develop it. I don't know how well he will be able to develop it. I can give the concepts, but it has to be converted into a software model. But in fact, when I was listening to Manjula, I was getting a thought process that I should pseudonymize the data of all our members and then give a task to people to break that pseudonymization and find out who is that member. Okay, then we will be doing a testing.
But
of
sir,
that pseudonymization.
Anant doesn't have a criminal mind.
No,
He's on the good side.
FDPPI is processing the data of our members. Now I want to pseudonymize it and create a pseudonymized data set and give it for testing to people. Of course, that is not criminal because it is a task, it's a vulnerability testing. So perhaps we should be able to do that. Okay. It will prove the point that pseudonymization can be good enough. It is not easy to break it. I am sure that if the software person can convert what are the thoughts in my mind, you will not be able to break. Even Anand should not be able to break it. Okay, let me see. Okay.
Suma sounded quite excited. I think she's up for the challenge.
Okay, Govind, you have got something to say?
If you have a OSCP, Offensive Security Certification Professional, I'm sure you should be able to break it. I'm sure
Yes, I think so.
Say, putting extraordinary efforts to break is like breaking your encryption and other things. It's a malicious activity.
No, but what I'm talking about is that they are supposed to counter attack the hacker. Okay, this examination is for 24 hours even. If you start writing the exam today, I mean, this is not an exam. You are given a problem after problem after problem.
A hackathon. We will
like a hackathon.
We will organize a hackathon. Let that person come up with something.
Means there are two things. One, as Sir pointed out, he can be a Uber hacker and not even a hacker, a cryptographer or something, cryptanalyst. Yes. What means if you think from the point of view of a hacker, like everyone, normal person, I will try to use the easiest method. So easiest method, what people do is the social engineering thing. I will just, means if I were in the task, just hypothetically, I would send an email saying that Navi sir has written a new book, or this is the meeting between Navi sir and the new IT minister and you are invited. Please click here and give the details. That's easy for me rather than doing spending countless nights on trying to find hackers. That's the way hackers work.
This social engineering will work in the case of getting a few such victims.
Yes, sir.
But in a scenario we are talking of like big data, anonymization or de-anonymization of a volume of data, social engineering will not work because I cannot go to 10,000
yes.
people.
Sample size matters, sir. Sample size
yeah.
is the biggest thing here.
Yeah. Good. Anyway, Manjula, please understand that I'm only trying to enhance the discussion. Okay, you have put the.
No, not at all, sir. I'm actually very happy that you stepped in because
Okay.
you brought out a very valid point that
Mr. Navi, Mr. Navi,
breaking something is.
somebody is required to trigger you, and
Yeah,
we all
that
get
is right.
benefited.
That
We
is
all
right.
get benefited.
Okay.
It was
Absolutely.
what you pointed out is actually very, very valid. However, for organizations which have
No,
sensitive data, they need to be careful.
I have a solution. I am with this solution I have been having in my mind for last 1.5 to 2 years. I even submitted one say provisional patent also, but I am not finding a software developer who can convert that into a piece of software. The coding, I have not spent money, efforts in learning coding, but if it can be done, I think there are solutions. The technology is versatile enough to actually create any good solution. Only thing is criminals are finding the technology, using the technology for finding their solutions. We are not finding the solutions because we don't have sufficient incentives. They have got incentives because they directly benefit. Whereas we are only trying to prevent some crimes or protect an organization because we get a salary. And that is never sufficient in terms of rewards which a hacker gets if he is able to find one solution for his purpose. So that asymmetrical, you can say, situation is what is making our task difficult. Like Anant was telling about quantum, this thing. Hackers will use perhaps first use quantum computing to break. But why not we first use to create a security process which is unbeatable except by matching quantum investment? Then it becomes difficult for them to invest and do it. But we don't do it. We'll keep waiting for some 100 data breaches to happen and then try to upgrade our security. So that is why we lose out our battle. Yeah, Anup has got something to say. Yeah, anybody else?
Sir, our school means college outreach project, I forgot the name, which we just announced. We can have, as someone pointed out, a hackathon for students to create some pseudonymization or your idea as well as their idea. Okay. That will be a good starting point for our engagement. So
yeah, that's a good idea. It's a good idea. We'll try to carry it forward. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
But this word hackathon just came to my mind when we were discussing here. Okay, so maybe it is something which we can try to do. Yeah, I think Satya wanted to say something. I don't know whether he's still there or he's left. Okay. Anyway, Manjula, thank you for triggering the thoughts, because these are all things for which we will not find overnight solutions. Okay.
Absolutely, sir. And thank you for the opportunity. I really have to thank Shalini for that. And I have to.
Navi, sir. Yes. So we were looking forward to this session. I am a mayor, coordinator here. So all thanks to Navi, sir, for bringing us all together.
Big thanks to Govind, actually, because I was talking to Govind and I was saying, I've looked at all the Jnanavardhini topics. I really don't know what to talk about.
I wanted to request Mr. Nair to say the vote of thanks for you.
Okay.
Mr. Nair.
Before that, Shalini, just one quick question. See, Navi sir, we are planning to have the next session on data classification and e-discovery tools. I just wanted to request you to give some guidance on what should we be focusing, because I want to work on it. I have done some POCs earlier. So what should be the focus to present to this forum? Just a quick two-liner.
Okay, I'll just give a thought to that, or we'll connect outside the meeting, and then you just send me a mail or something like that. I will click on that and respond. Okay.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Nair, please.
Yeah,
finally. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Very well.
Okay. Yeah, good evening, everyone. We just had a wonderful, very informative and excellent, well-discussed session on anonymization and pseudonymization. The two commonly mentioned techniques for enhancing the privacy compliance. These two techniques are most often used interchangeably, and it always creates a doubt in the mind. And today, Ms. Manjula Subramanian has taught us the basics of these two techniques, and she had also created an interest in all of us, and most importantly, helped in removing the confusions. So thank you, Ms. Manjula Subramanian.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Starting with the basics, you were able to build our interest by explaining to us why it is required, why it is important, the techniques, the challenges, and the case studies. That's a good learning that we had. And for me personally, the takeaways is many. And I hope, I'm sure that the other participants too would echo the same. So on behalf of FDPPI and all the participants, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Manjula once again for this wonderful, excellent session. And thank you, Anand, for pitching in and enriching us on the synthetic data and the applications. And thank you, Navi sir, as always, for enhancing the discussion, ever willing to share the knowledge and helping us to learn more every day.
Thank you.